Hello, welcome to Discovering Buddhism. We're here, one here and one there. So I hope you're well, and we've got our second class on Bodhichitta, generating compassion tonight. I was just thinking, anyone out there who, if there's any problems technically, like if it's too soft or if the lighting seems to me a bit dim, but if there's any problem seeing or hearing or any other problem, just put a message in the live chat. Yeah, that might help up a bit. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, the Buddha's very well lit, which is more interesting probably than me. So, okay. So hopefully you've got your notes, and also the big clump of notes from Kay Minor, which is transcript of her teaching this subject many years ago, I think it was, in Holland, where she was the main teacher in the Holland's FPMT Centre in Holland. I think she actually took, it probably looks like it's about 6 or 10 weeks, doesn't it? How many? About 10 sessions. So she obviously took a lot longer to get through it than we're doing in 4 weeks.
It's just 14
but there's
teachings.
Right, yeah. So, but she's a good teacher, and also there's some good meditations. They've actually got the guided meditations there as well. So it's not compulsory reading, but just there if you want to go a bit further. And the other book I'm going to use, well, this one, Lama Zopa, which is on the reading list, Bodhichitta, holding it up to the microphone. And this is the one I'm going to refer to tonight. Thupten Jimpa, A Fearless Heart. A Fearless Heart. It looks backwards in the screen, but I guess it's ordinary. It's sort of around the right way if you're looking at it. Thupten Jimpa's A Fearless Heart. Fantastic book about his experiences as a Buddhist teacher and clinician. He runs psychology groups at Stanford University and testing to see how effective the traditional Buddhist meditations are on Western minds. So we'll have a good look at that. Okay, so let's start with our 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation. Get comfortable, and we'll do 5 minutes of breathing meditation. Okay, coming into our inner world, the body, the mind, what's happening inside. Because it's always good to just check our motivation, set the tone for the teachings and the session. Appreciate the opportunity we have to do some practice, study the teachings, work with our mind. We're doing this not just for our own benefit of all beings, ultimately to become an enlightened being, the ultimate way to benefit beings as an enlightened being. So now coming into the body, making sure we're comfortable on the chair or the floor. Feel that we're physically relaxing with each out breath, letting go. We're also breathing out all the busy mind, the busy day we've had. Just coming into the very simple process of watching how we breathe, watching the breath. finding the place where we can focus on the breath. Could be the abdomen rising and falling, could be the nostrils, or it could be the whole body. Finding that comfortable place to focus on the breath and then staying there, resting our mind there. Checking now and again whether we're still on the breath. If we've been distracted with thoughts, that's okay, just let them go. Patiently come back to the breath. Thoughts come and go, but we don't follow them, we just stay with the breath. Just relax. So let's start with these questions. I think most of them come from the actual DB questions, which I have the answers to. Quite long answers. But so this is just covering really what we started last week. What's Bodhichitta? Anyone remember the definition? By anyone, I mean Julia, who's the only person in the room.
No,
Right?
maybe today.
Okay, yes. Julia, do you remember?
No, I don't actually.
Do you remember what how the word's broken up? Bodhi? Bodhi, what? Sanskrit? The Bodhi mind, that's enlightenment, Bodhi. And Chitta is mind, so enlightened mind. So Bodhi's enlightened mind is, Chitta is mind. So that's the formal sort of literal definition. What's a kind of a more informal definition? Any idea? If someone just said, what's all this Bodhicitta nonsense? What's that? What does it mean? No idea.
I know, but it's not sort of, it's hard to,
Just put it in ordinary words.
in enlightened mind.
It's the enlightened mind.
Yeah.
Enlightened mind, which is the mind that wishes others beings
To stop.
be free of suffering,
Yeah.
have happiness, be free of suffering.
Yeah.
That's basically, I think, the simple answer. The mind of enlightenment, enlightened mind, the awakening mind, sometimes it's called. Great compassion, mind of great compassion. Let's see what they say in the formal answer guide. When we use bodhicitta, we're talking about the mind of enlightenment, the healthy mind. They actually stress this again and then, the healthy mind. The healthy mind in a very super healthy meaning, not just wellness, but the mind that is actually, if it's fully developed bodhicitta, it's the Buddha mind, the mind of enlightenment, which is the healthiest mind you can have. It's actually omniscient. The Buddha mind can actually see everything as it is. Just having the wish doesn't mean that we can remove the suffering of others. It's like being a well-meaning amateur. So that's probably, unless we're a bodhisattva, which is a very high practitioner who's getting close to Buddhahood and has developed natural, spontaneous bodhicitta. Remember, with those two sort of stages, the bodhicitta, which is like a rehearsal, and the spontaneous bodhicitta. I haven't got last week's notes here, but the actual practicing bodhicitta, and then there's the natural bodhicitta that is spontaneous. So we start with the practicing. We have to it's like simulating it. If once we're convinced that it's a good thing to have, not just a good thing, but the only way we can actually make any progress. So to be able to fulfill the wish, this wish, which is to help beings, it's an ideal to attain enlightenment, the culmination of our full potential. Just sort of abbreviating, it's a very long answer, the one we've given. The mind is completely free of all suffering, negative afflictive emotions and their tendencies. Stated being that characterized by having great skill, having perfected compassion and fully perfected wisdom. So that's giving us, pointing out that compassion is necessary but not sufficient to be enlightened. We need the mind of wisdom, which is seeing all things, how they exist, including how we exist, how the outside world exists. So the compassion is necessary and the wisdom is necessary to get fully enlightened. So, so to have that motivation, to want to have bodhicitta, they say this is the best motivation for living your life, for making it meaningful. And by developing this healthy mind, mind of bodhicitta, wishing to benefit others. By the way, you also become happy, by the way. Okay, so that's a pretty good byproduct. That's the long answer. And why is it important to develop this? Well, I think we've answered that because it's the only way to become enlightened. They don't actually ask that question, but I think we've done that. There's no choice. You can't actually leave it out. This is in the Mahayana teaching. Mahayana to become fully enlightened. For the teaching, in the Pali tradition, the Theravada tradition, they teach bodhicitta, they teach compassion, but not as strongly, not emphasised as being necessary as much, because they're teaching self-liberation, which is basically concerned with one's own end of suffering, ending one's own suffering, whereas the Mahayana motivation is to end our own suffering in order to help others end theirs. So that's a higher state according to the Mahayana teaching. Higher state. That's the being of highest capacity. What do we have in common with other beings, which, when contemplated, helps develop equanimity? Okay, so remember we started on equanimity last week, which is seeing others as important as ourselves. That thing of just realizing that other beings are also have so many things in common with ourselves, and the friend, enemy, and stranger classification is very artificial, very based on our own limited, blinkered view of the world, and we're trying to break down those categories. Can you think of one thing that we use to help break down the boundaries, friend, enemy, and stranger? One thing. Anyone out there? So look, there's actually a good rundown. Well, one thing, just think of the one thing that we start off with that practice, that everybody wants suffering and nobody wants... Everybody wants happiness and nobody wants suffering. That's really the bottom line. Can't quibble with that. But then Lama Zopa in his book has a very more extensive answer. He says they include that we depend, how much we depend on others for our happiness. So the physical comforts, we sometimes do this. There's a really good Shantideva meditation where we look at every way that we depend on others in our life. Food, clothing, shelter, all the comforts, basics and the comforts, technology, medical services, all the things that we expect are all coming from others' skill. We depend on them. So, then there's also the more esoteric dependence on others to develop this great compassionate mind. We need others. We need someone to be compassionate toward. And so every patience, generosity. How can you be generous if there's no one there to be generous to? So all these positive qualities, the things that we're trying to develop on the road to bodhicitta and enlightenment, all depend on others. I'm just having a quick look at what else he said. So also, we also, like us, they suffer. They need help. They don't want suffering, but they're like us. They get sick. They suffer loss when their loved ones die or suffer. They have three types of suffering: disappointment in wanting worldly happiness, and they lose their job, and the marriage falls apart. But these things that they're relying on, like us, are impermanent. They can provide some satisfaction, but not lasting. By nature, they're changeable. So that's the third type of suffering, because we're in this cycle of karma, rebirth. That's the so we're all in this together, more or less. So until we get out of it, or we get out of samsara, we're all going to be suffering in different ways. Yeah. So that's an extensive answer. Plenty to think that reasons, and also there's so many of them too. When you think of we're one, there's so many others, which is more important. So these are different ways to help us to develop equanimity, which is the preparing the ground for compassion and loving kindness. Then, can you think of situations where seeing all other beings as equal may not be helpful? Okay, so think of that.
Not really. If you think of someone as your equal, you're not more. Just say the person doesn't have the greatest intentions for you, but it means you can also empathise with them and you can, put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
It's better for communication anyway.
But I'm thinking, because one thing that they say is,
you mean like bad friends? You're talking about
but they say don't take it too literally. Like if your mother's really sick and wants you to come over and help and do something, oh no, look, I've got to treat everyone the same. You know?
I know what you mean.
So that they do point out that
like you have to think, you have to use that wisdom side as well.
Yeah. Just people can't hear Julia, but I'll just sort of repeat it. So people can't. People need to think of what's the skillful thing to do in each situation, right? So it means that even though the mind of equanimity is what we're striving for, there are still people who are very more important in our life than a stranger, that because we have karmic connections with our relatives, loved ones, pets, and so on. So we've still got to look after them, probably more than we would someone who we've never met before. But we can still have the mind of realising that they're all having their needs. Okay, so we're just using skillful means and common sense, I guess. I think that's what they're getting at with that question. There's no sort of answer to that question in the written answer.
It's quite broad, really. It depends on the sorts of situations.
It depends on the situation, yeah. So sometimes we might have to give. I've heard people ask Rinpoche or some of the teachers what, they've got the marriage and the children, but they want to be practitioners. Why? How can I reconcile this? I've just discovered Buddhism now, and I've already married with kids, and they always say, make that your practice, make your family the practice, make the kids the practice. Use all your patience, your teachings as your sort of field to work in. Lamia, she's very big on that. But then there are other people who can make a break, like the partner realises that they're probably born to be ordained or something, and they can make an amicable split. Maybe both partners decide that it's happened that both partners become ordained or want to do practice more than concentrate on the relationship. Okay, that has happened, but it's a different. It's a case by case, as I say. But it happens when people, especially the Westerners, because they haven't actually come across the Dhamma before, and they could well have got a relationship and a marriage and everything on track before they meet the Dhamma. They want to do practice, and they also want to have their family and so on.
But you can do both. You can practice.
Yeah, you can.
You may not take up, you'd be a lay practitioner, but I know lots of people.
Yeah, there's lots of examples. I can think of many. But
or when you're in your older years, you might decide when your children are all grown up.
Yeah, the danger with that is the fixing it doing it when I get old may not happen.
No, I'm just saying. I know. Well, I know they always say that about study, don't they? Don't leave it to the last minute. Like
right.
People say, I'll do further study when I retire.
Oh,
so
okay.
That may never happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You mean Buddhist study?
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And then as you get older, and I'm just retired myself, you sort of not as quite as energetic as you were when you were 30 and 40, and may not be able to do that many nungnays or big retreats. But so yeah, it's good to practice as much as you can at the time, even if it means getting up earlier in the morning and doing before you go to work and so on. Let's see. So yes, I think that's enough for last week, and I just found a little bit more from Lama Zopa on the benefits of bodhicitta and kindness, loving kindness. So it's just really reminding ourselves that the benefits, we don't have to just stick to those 10 points, which are quite formal, which we looked at last week. But the benefits are also listed as recipients of kindness. Think of all the times in our childhood and our lives that we've been receiving kindness, loving kindness from our mothers, our fathers, our relatives, our friends, our partners, and so this is being the recipient of kindness, and it could be a special teacher. If we're lucky enough to have a special teacher that inspired us to believe in ourselves and study and go to university and so on. So these are special people that we can appreciate what they've done. Also, it gives self-confidence when people, especially as kids, if we find that there's a special relative or friend who obviously believes in us and has great confidence in what we can do, that can overcome any sort of self-doubt and lack of self-confidence. And then the benefits of giving, this thing called the helper's high. I haven't heard it that often, but sometimes you hear that, the helper's high. So people who are actually out, particularly volunteers, doing something, or not necessarily, but they could be working in the medical field or helping old people or people in need, that feeling of satisfaction. It's very fulfilling to be able to do things like that. There are people who've life stories show that when they gave up something that was obviously very lucrative, like particularly lawyers, my profession, and because I actually never really wanted to do big corporate law. I went as my best job was being a volunteer overseas in a tiny little country called Tuvalu, as the people's lawyer. And even though I didn't get paid at all, we actually just got board and a tiny allowance, enough for food. But it was probably the most satisfying job I'd had. I loved it. I was the only lawyer for the whole population, the whole country. And then there was an attorney general for the government. But then other people, the woman who started Oz Harvest, she's often in TV and documentaries. She used to be a very successful PR person, I think. I forgot her name. She has huge glasses and she's very high profile. But she said she found, as soon as she's got the idea for Oz Harvest and recycling food that the big supermarkets were throwing out in the restaurant, all her stress, she had a lot of stress and personal problems, but that all disappeared when she started working for others in this way. She managed to be able to make a living out of it as well, and started this amazing organisation that now recycles food for those in need. You see the trucks driving around Sydney quite often. She was one of our speakers at the Happiness Conference many times. So there's good examples like that. People who've just given up some very well-paid but not fulfilling work to do something for others. So that's a good example. Last week I talked about empathy and compassion, that empathy is feeling others' pain, which is the first step to love and compassion. but it can be quite, if you stay at empathy, where you just, all you're doing is feeling others' pain, there are some studies that have shown that that can be quite debilitating and you can get burnout, which Mature Ricard has studied that very carefully. He's a very famous meditation teacher, Mature Ricard. So the need, just having that extra intention, motivation to feel others' pain and suffering and wanting to do something about it, that's the extra thing that takes to the next step, wishing to relieve them from the suffering, doing what we can, if we can do something to relieve them from the suffering. So that has a much different effect, more positive effect on the brain when they do mind mapping. So yeah, so that's basically the more informal way of what the benefits of wishing to help others and maybe changing our life. We don't all have to go to Africa and start helping the needy. Lama Yusha used to often warn against that. People who go to the Kopan course and hear the teachings for the first time can get very zealous. Zealous? Is that a word? Yeah, very keen. Over, so almost fanatical. I've got to go. I've got to be Bodhisattva. So straight to Africa, and he says that it's a complete disaster because they can't deal with the different conditions. They're Westerner, so he used to call that Inji compassion. Inji is a word for white people. Western Inji compassion, have a big laugh. So he said, actually, some people might be able to do that, but the main thing is to develop your mind. Compassion is about the mind.
You may actually cause harm. You may actually cause some harm to those people.
Yeah, you could. You're trying to help. People may even not want help, and you're just a problem. There's actually, again, lots of documentaries on how this can backfire. So there used to be a whole series I once watched where they show families who go and work with other people overseas. Sometimes it's really successful, particularly young people who are very open-minded, that they can accept the new culture very easily. Usually, not always, but sometimes young people are more likely than older people. But I found that I was really lucky to be able to travel a lot when I was actually just a student, backpacking man around the world, and I think it was the best education I got. And just watching the Dalai Lama speaking over the weekend, he said that or it might have been, actually no, it was on TV last night when there was a show with Michael Palin, a very famous comedian, who was travelling through the Himalayas, and he had an audience with the Dalai Lama. And they were talking about travel, and His Holiness said he always wanted to travel. From the moment he was up in the Patala with his telescope looking what's happening around, he would look beyond the mountain and say, one day I'll go there and see what's happening over there. He always wanted to travel. So he thinks it's probably the best education. I think too, particularly if you go to other cultures, because it widens the mind. You can't really be fanatical or over patriotic if you just see what's happening in particularly the developing countries where people are having a struggle just to stay alive. Changes your complete outlook. So travel is fantastic. So this can be a terrific lesson. Not just to think, oh well, these people haven't got as much as us, these poor people. But for me, I actually spent quite a few years living in these tiny little countries, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Pacific Islands. Tuvalu is about 1,000 kilometres north of Fiji. Okay. One of the most isolated countries in the world. It's near Kiribati. Kiribati is in the news. It's probably going to go under if the sea level goes up as much as a metre. It's only 1 metre above sea level. So it's an atoll. So these people, when you're actually living there, not just being a tourist, you realise the joy in their hearts. They actually have just enough to eat. mainly fish and coconuts, but they have fun. They're not obsessed. They're certainly not all wishing they could go and have a very materialistic life in the West. They actually sometimes do go to the West, and they can't get back quickly enough. They love coming home. The one of the main money spinners for that little country, Tuvalu, is the young men go and work on ships as crew, and they send money back. They get very well paid, and all 99% of them just want to come back. They don't want to. They're not attracted by the West at all. It's very interesting. So there's this. If you're fortunate enough to go and actually live in a traditional society and see where there's this concern with the group, the community, rather than the individual, they're much more better at looking after old people, sick people. As soon as a child can walk, they're actually given a baby to carry. It's like that. So they're all looking after each other. It's very hard for us to, having grown up in the West, I probably couldn't live there full time, but just to have a few years to see what's happening, how they interact with others, and particularly how they look after older people. So this individualistic society we grow up in, where everything's to do with the rights, not troubling people's privacy, and can be a problem. Particularly when we have things like the COVID virus, where people are forced to be isolated, even more than normal, then there can be problems psychologically. I found that one of the best things to keep people mentally well, we're talking a bit more about the well, not so much bodhicitta, but just feeling happier, is to interact with others, have this community. The more people interact, the less likely they're going to have problems with depression and so on. So
Also, when we went to India, people wanting us to come to their home.
Exactly.
Very open and
yeah.
And there's so many people around, it's so busy, and then when you come back to Sydney, it's like it's just houses.
Exactly. I think I remember the first time I went on an overseas trip, I think it was to Bali, and I went to the villages. The people were, giving me food and things. And then I came back to Australia. I thought I was in a hospital. It was really sterile. Yeah. It was so clean. Everyone was sort of really physically comfortable, but it was empty. I thought this is just not a rich country in spiritually.
Not so willing to include you.
No, everyone's sort of keeping their distance. Yeah. So the Tibetans, I think, definitely have this idea of inviting strangers to their home. Apparently, it's because when they're out in the plains with the yaks, their strangers have to be looked after because people get trapped in the snow and so on. So it's a natural thing to look after others. It's part of their religion and also their culture. So a lot to learn there from other cultures particularly. So how are we going? Okay. So there's quite a bit here on self-compassion, because I'm going to do the self-compassion meditation at the end of this class. And it's also stressed very much particularly His Holiness's teaching, the Dalai Lama's teaching, and particularly in teachers who are teaching Tibetan Buddhism to the Westerners, like Thupten Jingpa. So they've found that His Holiness was quite shocked when he was told at a meeting of psychologists in the Mind Life series of meetings, Mind Science, I think it's called. So there's some books published where all the best scientists and psychologists, basically psychologists, that's right, get together with the Dalai Lama and compare the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism as far as mental health goes and Western ideas of mental health. And the first meeting, he was told about this problem in the West of people not having a good self-image, self-hatred, self-loathing. And he actually couldn't believe it at first. He had to get special translators to translate. And he said this is something that he'd never come across in Tibet, because people have such a strong sense of self-confidence. Particularly, he thought maybe it was part of because of this caring for each other, where people not so much caught up in their own problem. So anyway, he realised this is a big problem, and so he started teaching to the importance of self-confidence, self-compassion, and he distinguishes it very strongly from pride, which is pride in the worst sense, because there's pride which can help, which is self-confident, but pride where there's this inflated ego, not based on a good sense of self-worth. But so he said this, Rabin is also very good at teaching this as well, the importance of self-confidence and good sense of self-worth. So I've just got a few notes that I took from, this is from the book on compassion with Thupten Chodron, Thupten Chodron, yeah, the nun, Thupten Chodron, who wrote these series of books with the Dalai Lama on Lamrim, particularly for Westerners. So he says, just a few quotes, self-love involves caring for ourselves and acceptance and kindness that's free from unrealistic expectations. Okay, free from this idea that we have to be perfect, accepting our faults. It's different from self-indulgence, where we sort of feel that we just have to indulge in all the worldly pleasures, and different to self-centeredness, where we think we're more important than others. So genuine self-love allows to give more regard to others and live more harmoniously with others. And so he says, it's very good to develop this strong sense of self-worth. So once he realised this was a problem in the West, particularly for not for everyone, of course. Some people have a very good, strong sense of self-confidence and self-worth. But he said it's not just, Thupten Jinpa thinks it's not just a Western problem, but it's a education problem. So he said in the studies they've done, first of all, they just did studies in America with Westerners compared to, say, Tibetan. And then they did studies in all the countries, including India and developing countries. And they found that people with better education had a tendency to have this problem with self-worth. So it doesn't necessarily apply only to Westerners. So the more people have a better education and get more sort of into a worldly type of job, the more likely they are to, probably in the world more competitiveness. That could be it. But definitely it's not. They found that the people in Thailand, from all the world surveys they did, had the best, healthiest sense of self-worth and self-confidence. We thought that might be part of the Buddhist. I'm not sure whether they tested Tibetans, Chris. Hard to. Yeah, I'm not sure if they did that. So, so I'm just looking at, I've actually seen the notes on page 2. I've given you the reference to the book and some of the page references. And there's actually a psychologist called Kristen Neff, who did these various tests on self-compassion. So I'm just quickly looking at my notes here. Okay, so they're trying to sort of work out the source of this this tendency in the West to have a low self-esteem and so on. And it says, they said it's probably it could be partly to do with being competitive, brought up to compete, and looking at others as either those who are higher in terms of achievement, some sort of envy, those who are equal, we just compete and want to be better than, and those who are lower, we sort of tend to reject. This sort of scaling ourselves, ranking ourselves in any sort of social setting.
Do you think sometimes there's an expectation to be ambitious?
Yes.
And if you're not ambitious, you're lacking in that. People say you're lacking in drive.
Yes, I know. Julia's just saying about the importance given to ambition. I mean, sometimes they ask you that in job interviews. How do you see yourself in another 12 months?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to be managing director or something. Oh, right. Okay, well, that's big ticks for that. So, yes, there's this thing of, I think it starts from school, especially if you're in a team and you've got to beat the other team.
I've had it said to me that I have no ambition because I've worked in a job for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I said it's about job satisfaction.
Job satisfaction.
And the whole work-life balance.
That's right.
So I don't want to be stressed out of my mind all the time.
Yes. I actually had the same thing because when I had this job, quite a good job in public services, sort of going through the legal, different levels of senior lead, whatever they were, the rank. And then I just took this job as a volunteer in Tivada with no pay at all. The colleagues just said, "You're mad. You're actually mad. What's about your super and all this sort of thing." And so I never had that. Even though I was sort of educated in that atmosphere, it didn't make any impression on me. I think I was a bit of a odd one out. Probably always has been. But so it can be quite oppressive. I think luckily my parents weren't pushing me all the time. I think that makes a big difference. If your parents are pushing you to be top of the class all the time, and also giving you too much reinforcement. This is another thing that Thupten Jinpa thinks, that if you get too much reinforcement as children for worldly success, every time you get first prize in the class, you get a big, reward, new computer, whatever. Then if you don't have success, then fall apart. Because if you sort of have an experience of not being the best, then there's this calamity, because you've rated yourself on these external achievements. So then there's the idea of being a perfectionist, wanting to do the best, said to be very dangerous. So he actually gives you a checklist to see whether you have signs of a lack of self-compassion. Okay, so this is the question. I feel the question. I try to be understanding and patient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. Yes or no? So I try to be understanding and patient towards those aspects of my personality I don't like. So when I'm going through a very hard time, I give myself caring and tenderness I need. Okay. When I feel inadequate in some way, I try to remind myself that feelings of inadequacy are shared by most people. That's a good one on equanimity. So when things are going bad for me, I see the difficulties as part of life that everyone goes through. Common humanity. Okay? So it puts this in common humanity. When I'm feeling down, I try to approach my feelings with curiosity and openness. That's mindfulness, it says in brackets. So if you get yes to all those, you're in a very healthy place. But if you sort of, when I'm going through a hard time, I give myself caring tenderness. That's self-kindly, rather than sort of just, collapsing, going to the bottle, self-medication. There are different ways you can divert, escape. So this is just, when I fail at something important, I try to keep things in perspective. Okay. I think that would involve, well, there's many people better than me, and I'm obviously not perfect.
And you learn from failure.
And also, it's just a job, or it's just that. It's not the end of the world. Okay, I failed that particular subject. Okay, I'll do it again. Choose a different subject, whatever.
Proves that they didn't know the subject very well.
Yeah.
Study more.
That's right. Could have been my fault. May not have been the test. So these are some of the things that he says we can look at, and so
It's interesting.
yep. There's a very good thing on the high cost of low self-esteem. Good name for the chapter.
Well, do you think that sometimes people get envious as well? So if you're doing something a bit different, they also get a bit envious. Like, why don't you have all the troubles that I have? I pay off a mortgage. Why aren't you, sort of thing?
Right. That's right. How come you're not doing your duty?
Yeah.
Okay, because we're all.
I've had, why don't you drink alcohol? Do you think you're better than us? I've had that said to me. It's
Why
like,
don't you what?
drink alcohol.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you
Yeah.
guys, do you think you're better than us? It's like, no, it's just I don't drink alcohol.
Yes.
But it's, it becomes, they personalise it, because you're just trying to navigate through things and make decisions. It's very interesting when that happens.
Yeah. But Julie's just raised, if you don't join into something like even drinking alcohol, the group, you think you're better than us. So these sort of things that people try and sort of, it's almost bringing you down to it's the tall poppy thing, I suppose, in a way.
That's true.
Yeah. So, so this self-compassion is not nothing. It's a really big thing and important to develop. It could take quite a while and could take time to actually work at it. But it's not in self-indulgence if we're doing it to be more realistic, to be stronger, and self-confidence is necessary in every walk of life, not just work, but in we have to believe in our ability to change, to practice Buddhism. The whole thing has to be belief in our Buddha potential, our Buddha nature. Yeah. So we need to remind ourselves of that. Part of taking refuge, I suppose. I believe that I can, just like the Buddha, I can develop, I can practice, I can go along the path and become enlightened. So it's not, it's a realistic understanding of our situation, and lets us feel more connected with us. It increases our connection. Right. So if you're lucky enough to be able to get this book by Trungpa Shinpa, you can have a look and do a bit more reading on it, because probably about half the book is about, probably not half, but a third or quarter on importance of self-compassion and exercises. Quite a few meditation exercises on how to improve our self-worth, self-confidence. So just now we touched. Remember last week we saw there's these two main ways of developing bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion: the 7-point cause and effect, and the exchanging ourselves for others. So just looking at the first one, this is it's basically the 3 points that really get all the publicity and all the emphasis, because the first 3 are said to be the causes, and the second 4 are said to be the effects of the practice. So the cause of seeing all beings as our mothers, looking at page 3 now, remembering their kindness and wishing to repay their kindness. Those 3 steps, they're the causes of the next 4, which is developing loving kindness, developing compassion, developing universal responsibility, and that means taking responsibility for others' suffering and wanting to help them, and bodhicitta, which is of course the mind of enlightenment, wanting to attain enlightenment so that we can bring others to enlightenment. So that's the 7-point cause and effect practice, and I've got the reference in Yangtze Rinpoche's book there, because he goes through it in great detail. But just let's have a look at the first 1 or 2, if we've got time. Seeing all beings as our mothers. So I found this is quite, when I first heard it, probably at the Copan course, just couldn't. It was just being our mothers, because I hadn't even thought much about reincarnation. And I thought, well, so the logic is that if we do accept rebirth and reincarnation, then we've been in relationships to every other human being and every other being, even animal. If we accept there's infinite numbers of rebirths we've had and infinite relationships with each other. That's hard, because imagining infinity is not easy to grasp. So then they'll say, well, you just pick out the mothers and focus on that. My thought was, well, why not pick out the fact that we're all each other's mother-in-law, or each other's brother, each other's father, each other's worst enemy. So if we've been in every relationship to every other, that's all true. But if we're trying to make an improvement to our mind, we pick out the relationship that is usually the strongest, and the one that's where we've been the recipient of the most loving kindness. Okay, so they pick the mother. So there's always people who haven't had that good experience of a mother that's been kind and compassionate and given them the best. And so it's most of the teachers say, well, use an example of anybody else in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a teacher you met. So someone who's actually given you the most love and affection. It could be the father. So it doesn't have to be the mother, even though that's what all the texts are written in terms of the mother. So that's why they say, if you just Bodhicittas, you do have to have this background in different parts of the Lam Rim, and one is at least be open to the possibility of past lives and rebirth. At least, allow, even if it's not perfectly clear, just allow the argument, be open, have an open mind. So if we have an open mind to past lives, reincarnation, we can accept that there was a possibility of other beings being at some time, some stage, being our mothers. Even if we're an animal, and animals are a good example of how well they look after their young. Particularly if you watch some of the David Attenborough programs, you can see how much compassion, loving kindness. Not necessarily, it's with attachment, and it's said that the mother's love for the child is also mixed with attachment, of course, unless they're spiritually advanced. But it's still got a high element of compassion, where the mother will sacrifice their lives or their welfare, their food, to look after the child. We see that very often, in the outside world. If we've had a very good, loving upbringing, our parents, our mothers, and our fathers have given us huge amounts of support. So you can use the person who's dearest and closest, who's not necessarily the mother. So this is, we can add this to, if we accept this idea that everybody's been our mother and all other relationships, that's part can go in the equanimity list. What have we got in common with others? I was just trying to think before the class whether I certainly intellectually accept it, but as for spontaneous seeing of all other beings as my mother, I haven't got there yet. Definitely not. So, but I'm much closer than I was probably when I first heard the teaching, because it was just quite ridiculous when I first heard it. But it's at the intellectual stage and working on the more spontaneous stage. I think when you meet a great teacher, even just watching the Dalai Lama teaching or Lama Zopa teaching or it's not that hard to believe when you see what they're giving to their student, how powerful their compassion is, and how they do treat everybody equally.
And how everybody wants to be around them.
How everyone wants to be around them. That's right. And how skillfully they try to give everyone equal attention without obviously giving. Of course, they have to give individual advice because everybody needs different things. But that in private, they'd do that. But at least in public arena, they have this wonderful sense of equanimity and should demonstrate it. And it's Lama Yeshe used to give such loving kindness to it. He used to tell people, okay, I'm your mother, I'm your father, I'm your this and that. If the person was sort of taking refuge with him, he was telling them, okay, I'm all your relatives, I'm all your this, and he'll be giving them support. And you could just tell that he meant it. It wasn't just words. So that's the first one. Remembering their kindness. So that involves a lot of teachings on what the mother does. So if you have extensive teachings on this, they go through what the mother does from the moment of conception, how this uncomfortableness as the baby grows in the mother's stomach. Lama Zopa does very good teaching on this one. And what the mother would sacrifice, as the body gets more and more out of shape, and she has all these different cravings and things, that morning sickness and so on. So all that is part of what they're doing in order to have us as their child, part of the gestation process and so on. So, what parents give up for the child. So that's another meditation, particularly noting the neck. Also, they say to notice the karmic connection that the child has with the mother. Because it's not just by chance that baby's been born in that mother's womb, but there's some karmic connection. They were in some relationship in previous lives. Could have been partners, they could have been brothers and sisters. There's no limit to what the relationship was between those two. I remember Lama Yeshe watched the karma for being born as a twin. I think the person asking it was a twin. And he said straight away, attachment. Because the two babies are obviously very close in previous life, both go to the same womb. So it was quite a shock. But he said, it's obvious, isn't it? It's attachment. Didn't think that was a very high question at all. So wishing to then sort of realising what's been done by the mother for the child, and then wishing to repay the kindness. So this feeling of that might, even if we just think what our parents have done, if we've lost our parents, or we're parents that we're in the process of losing them, if they're getting old, it often goes through the minds of what they've done. There's this amazing, because at the time when we're children, certainly with me, I had perfect upbringing, really, but I just took it for granted. I didn't actually realise at the time that this parents that I've got were somehow different, because I had no one to compare them with, really. So just take it for granted. But as you get older, you just realise that this has been an extraordinary upbringing that we've had, and that we've done so much. And there is this sense of, how am I going to repay them? And they've done so much continuously for decades, for my whole life. So there is that sense of, what can we do? And of course, they don't expect anything in return, but this is part of the developing the wish to repay the kindness, which takes us to doing something for others. So this is the cause, remembering the mother beings as our mothers, the kindness, and wishing to repay. And so that means we have the feeling, developing love towards them, and then developing that we want to make them as happy as possible. We don't want them to suffer, compassion, and then we go to the universal taking responsibility ourselves, and those other steps, which we'll go into a bit more.
There's a lot of suffering in childbirth, and it's just this amazing joyous effort once it's over. It's like, the baby's born.
Right, yes.
It changes very, from extreme pain to this amazing elation.
That's right, that's right. And the baby, all the baby's doing is crying and showing dissatisfaction. But all the mother's doing is actually giving more and more love and kindness. So it is extraordinary, amazing relationship. So just so we have time to do the self-kindness practice, I might finish there. If there's any more questions, there's still people looking. That's good. So we'll continue on the 7th point. We've still got 2 more weeks. And there's quite a lot of good teachings from His Holiness in the book I've been referring to on what happiness is. Wanting others to be happy is sort of the formal definition of love. But He's going through all the, does it include the samsara, the things that will disappoint us, like perfect job and perfect, our normal worldly ambition. And he says there's actually 3 or 4 different kinds of happiness. So we include them all, everything that people want, include, even if it might be what we might consider as suffering. Second type of suffering, which is wanting particularly sensory pleasures and so on. He says, in this practice, you actually put everything in, every type of practice. You want them to have temporary suffering, temporary happiness, and the full time, eternal enlightenment. And also during the process, the other type is when you're having a really good meditation session, you can have actually, if you're lucky, you have these blissful experiences. I haven't yet, but there are these, as you make progress with concentration, single point concentration, there are these moments of happiness, great bliss, which is another type of happiness. So all those are included in wishing others to be happy. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit of an outline on this. It's called self-kindness, making peace with ourselves. Comes from Thupten Jinpa's book. I've put 2 practices together. So the first part of the meditation is that we cultivate self-forgiveness. Okay, we look at how we react when we make mistakes, and we check to see whether we feel that we judge ourselves too harshly, and then we start to feel guilty. We've done wrong. So we identify that. Maybe we don't have that, but we have the opportunity to check whether we have that tendency. We did something wrong, and then we look at how we acted. Did we over-condemn ourselves? Did we just move on and think we've learned from that and move on? Then we ask, we assume that we actually do react too strongly and we do overcharge. And we look at from the other side, as if we're the, instead of prosecution, saying you're a bad person, we're the defense. Well, why did I actually say those bad words to that person? Well, because that person might have harmed me. So even though I regret it later, it was a mistake, there was some sort of reason why I did that. I was belittled, I was silenced, and so on. So we just try and see things from the other side, because we're seeing 100% that we did the bad thing. Try to actually see it from the other way. Okay? We spend a little bit of time trying to see it from the other side. And then we look at, we use our breath to let go of that guilt. We sort of see that self-reproach was too strong, that we're only human, we make mistakes. So this is our common humanity, we recognize. And then we use our breath to breathe out. We're breathing out this holding on to something that I did wrong, and I'm still regretting it, I'm still feeling guilt. So we breathe it out. The second part is we use a compassion image. So you need to sort of think, what am I going to use? You could use, if you're a strong Buddhist, you could use an image of the Buddha or a stupa. Sometimes a stupa is an image of the Buddha's body, speech and mind. Or you can, a friend who you know totally accepts you, or could be friend, relationship, person, a special person. It could be just, it could be a pet. Could be to say some people feel closer to animals than to human. So, some pet that is completely accepting of you, and you have this strong acceptance of them as a compassion image. And, or you could just light, white light, representing all the loving kindness, forgiveness in the world. And you breathe in that, the compassion image. So you're breathing in acceptance, warmth, and so on. And then just briefly at the end, we feel that we have become a compassion image. We breathe in so much of that loving kindness, acceptance, we can breathe it out to others. We just share that acceptance with other beings. Okay, so it's quite a journey. Okay, we've got 15 minutes to do it. Okay, so let's try. Okay, get comfortable. Sitting, lying down, whatever's the most comfortable position. And bringing our attention from you, a minute or two, to the breath, to calm the mind. So we begin the practice of self-kindness, self-compassion, forgiveness of ourselves, bringing to mind something that we either have done recently or we can remember doing that we regret later. So this could be something we said to somebody, could be somebody at work, our partners, maybe in a moment of anger, of hurt. It could be something that only affected ourselves, didn't affect other people. It might have been quitting a job or making a change that we regretted, self-indulgence. Self-indulgence if we feel hurt or oppressed in some way. So don't dwell on the specifics, but just the feeling of self-reproach. The checking if we have this tendency to self-judge, thinking how stupid of me, I'm a bad person for doing that. Blaming ourselves, not the fault, identifying with the fault, condemning ourselves, not separating the fault from ourselves. Do we tend to do this often? The habit? Having unrealistic expectations and not being able to meet ourselves. Next, we actually ask ourselves why we did what we did, that we regretted, and we try and think of it in a compassionate way towards ourselves. Perhaps there are human reasons. Perhaps we just felt if we retaliated, we were hurt, insulted, belittled. At the time, we felt that We're justified in what we did. Later we regret it. Perhaps we were unjustly accused. Perhaps we confused, we might have experienced some other trauma and reacted badly. It's like the last straw. We'll try to see compassionately, understand what we did. We can admit it's wrong, but we can understand why we did what we did. I'm not enlightened, I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I'm like everyone else who makes mistakes. Feeling that common humanity with others. You can feel regret, but not guilt. See the fault, agree to work on the fault, but not condemn ourselves, not identify with the fault, blame the fault, blame the sin, not the sinner. So now we use the out-breath and we think, I forgive myself, I can let go. With each out-breath, we're feeling self-forgiveness, we're feeling letting go, this reproach, this guilt, breathing it out beyond the universe. I'm freeing myself with each out-breath. Self-judging, it's not helpful. Without each out-breath, feel we're letting go. I can let go, I am letting go. I'll learn from this mistake, move on. Using self-compassion. I'm not enlightened, I'm human. So next we visualize a compassionate image before us. Could be a person who we know accepts us as we are with all our faults. Someone we feel totally trusting toward. Someone who accepts us, loves us as we are. Could be our teacher, a guru, a partner, a pet, a friend. That compassion image is embodying acceptance, trust, and love. Forgiveness. Could be just white light, embodying all those qualities. Now we use our in-breath, with each in-breath drawing in compassion, acceptance, from the compassion image, like rays of nectar. Light enters the heart, soothes our mind, eliminates all anxiety, guilt, holding on, judgmental thinking. taking in that compassion, rays of nectar, like forgiveness. You feel totally safe, serene, at ease, as the light of compassion fills the body and the heart and the mind. Staying with that, the in-breath. Totally safe, forgiven, at ease, accepted. So we have become compassionate image ourselves. We're filled with the light of compassion, forgiveness. While we can visualize other beings in human form around us. And we breathe out the light of compassion, forgiveness into all those beings' hearts. Wishing them to have happiness and be free of suffering. May you, like myself, have happiness and be free of suffering. All sentient beings. May all you sentient beings, like myself, be happy, be healthy, and live in peace. So finally we can just dedicate any positive energy, merit, imprints on our mind from this practice, from tonight's teachings, and all the other practices we've done in the past, we'll do in the future towards our development of self-compassion, equanimity, loving kindness. So that we have peace in our hearts, and we dedicate to developing peace in the minds of all sentient beings and peace in the world. Okay, thank you so much for being there. being here and there. So we'll see you next week, same time. Have a great week and stay well. Okay, see you next time. Bye.